You're listening to 4CRB's interviews and talkback series.
It's a very good morning to David Ashton Lewis, Supreme Court Judge. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for welcoming me, and I'm happy to be here. Good morning to everyone. Good morning to Lynn, to Somerset, and anyone else who will send their name in. I'll name them personally.
Oh,
and
dear,
for those
you're in trouble
who
now.
Oh, blow that. I'm the judge.
Come on,
and
send in 10,000 names and we won't have a show.
Well, if you send in 10,000 names, I'll put you in a group and I'll say good morning to the 10,000. we do have the ability to exercise discretion, which sadly, in our society, our government and our law, is under severe challenge. So I'll just say good morning to all those other listeners. Thank you for listening.
Well, I did advertise yesterday that we did have a 4-sentence title for this one, and I boiled it all down to a couple of words. So I
constantly get accused of talking too much.
I can't remember how you phrased it, but it was your thoughts go on longer than my thoughts, or something to the conclusion.
But the title is Fantasy versus Fact in our society.
Oh, nice.
Do you like that one?
Yeah, I do.
I thought you accepted that.
No, I thought it was about 4 sentences before we got to that one.
Well, I did that, and you said it's too long.
Dive on in, David.
Well, yes, I'd come across some things, and sadly it involves our constant deferring and putting common sense to the side and putting Indigenous groups in a more heard position and paying absolute heed to them and not applying the law as it would be applied to non-Indigenous groups and not applying common sense. And I came across this archetypical matter that involves simply fantasy. And yet the law, if it had been raised on a non-Indigenous basis, it would have been laughed at. It would have been dismissed, and it could not proceed on that basis. And what this was, it was an action in the federal court brought by an Indigenous group to stop Woodside from proceeding with a matter that they had been given federal ministerial approval for. They had spent 10 years consulting with local Indigenous groups. They were happy with it, but one woman said she spoke to the spirit whales, and the spirit whales would not agree to this happening. Now, the spirit whales is a fantasy. For many atheists, it's like a Christian saying, I pray to God. But this one woman said she spoke with the spirit whales, and they would speak with her. So the matter came before the federal court. And Judge Craig Colvin, whilst not confirming or denying that spirit whales existed, ruled that Woodside had a duty to consider cultural harm caused by their project. Now, I repeat, they had spent a decade consulting with Indigenous groups who had said they saw no problem and agreed, were happy, and thus Tanya Plibersek, if it was when she was minister, it had been approved. Now, what I think that means when he says you must consider further the cultural harm, it means that whilst absolutely no one believed in spirit whales and believed in their existence, it would be against the law to upset the wild fantasies of a woman who imagines that she talks to whales. That is errant nonsense. His job is to apply the law as it is written, exercise his discretion. Look, in my years on the bench and now back, I hear some absolutely laughable, fantastic explanations about things. I politely listen. I hope that the opposing side counsel will get stuck into it. If they don't, I have certain freedoms as a judge to say things like, I've listened to you carefully. I want you to tell me, you're under oath, do you really believe what you have said? And when they say, oh, I do, and I'd say, yes, you do you believe that society holds to what you have said? Yes, some will say, or they should. Well, this is not about a court of what should or should not be. This is about what is. So anyway, because the woman, though, was only given special consideration. Imagine if a Christian woman had stood up and said, you can't do this because it will offend the Spirit of God and the Holy Spirit. She would be laughed at, she would be dismissed, or politely a judge would say, well, madam, all of society now is not Christian. We have Muslims, we have Hindus, we have Buddhists, we have atheists. So you're going to have to show me why I should uphold something that will be for the public benefit just because a small group or a group called Christians would be offended. I think all the listeners could understand what the judge would do from there. He wouldn't listen. He would make a real assessment. So evidently, though, we've reached the point in our law that indigenous fantasies must be indulged as a mark of respect. Woodside argued that they had invested significant time, energy and money liaising closely with the traditional owners and inhabitants for more than a decade, and they were happy for this to go ahead. And yet, this, a decade on, was the first that anyone had heard about spirit whales, and that they would be offended if this project went ahead. Woodside had done all of the environmental checks and had been given clearance to begin the project. Not so fast, Judge Colvin. He ordered Woodside to conduct a more thorough period of environmental assessment of the project. In other words, he was saying that Woodside should work out the terms with spirit whales, and that now to cap the nonsense even more, and Woodside had to pay all the costs, not the indigenous woman. Now, our law is being spat on, is being stood on, when we've got wokeisms come through so much that you're getting nonsense decisions like this. So what we've got now is fantasy takes precedence over fact. And I'll give you another example before you launch in with your very good questions. Recently in New South Wales, a very senior woman in the Department of Health, she was on the board, and I think she probably was not the chair of the board, but on it, but she was a senior administrator in the New South Wales Department of Health. And on that board, because of diversity, was an Aboriginal man who, in any other situation, would not have been sufficiently qualified to sit. But because of diversity and needing to take into account, anyway, to cut a long story short, the relationship between the woman, very senior in the New South Wales Department of Health, and this Aboriginal man deteriorated really to all-out warfare. He called her in front of others, I can't use the word on air, I'll say this, he openly called her a C. And then he also said to her in front of others, I'm going to kill you.
Oh,
now you imagine if a non-Indigenous person on any board in Australia called another director a C and threatened to kill them. But guess what happened? When this woman complained to two senior members in the New South Wales Department of Health, they sacked her. And that man remained on the board. But to credit to her courage, she just said, look, it doesn't matter whether your skin's any colour, whatever, this is wrong. And she fought it right through, right up to the top. And so she ended up being paid. She wasn't put back on the board, and she didn't want to go back. She was paid a massive amount of money, compensation, and that man was turfed off the board. Now, here's what happens when you become so woke, so diversified, so culturally aware, you start making nonsense decisions. So my view is this, that we have to stop this nonsense now. We have to stop it. We have to stand up for common sense. And although these progressives will say, agree with my words now, we have to stand up for justice, equity, fairness and inclusion. But I would make the change, yes, we do. We must stand up for that. But that doesn't only apply to minority groups. It doesn't only apply to Indigenous. Well, there has to be justice, equity, fairness and inclusion for others.
And that's the point. So before I go into my question, David,
yes.
There's a gentleman that I run into from time to time when I have a coffee, and he's always said to me, love your segment with David, but he keeps going on and on about the word woke and wokeists. Can you get him to define that for me and others once again? Because we have this discussion, and some people think it's this and some people think it's that. In his mind, what is woke?
Okay, I have said in previous show, it's been a while ago, woke is a urbanized African American, mainly New York term that developed there, where an African would be saying when they'd be talking about injustice to African Americans or whatever, I'm awake to that. I'm awake to unfairness of black African Americans. And naturally with their accent, even in their African American language, they would say, I'm awoke to that, bro. So you're woke to something. Now wokeism has been stolen from that and is now used for, so I hope your friend is listening.
I hope so too, Brian.
It's now used for everything, mainly an attack by the right of centre, and it's seen as left-wing progressive nonsense. It's used by the slightly left of centre to say, no, we are the people who are concerned about justice, fairness, equity and inclusion. Now, my response when I've been on speaking for, I was speaking yesterday, I'll be speaking again on Tuesday. My response is, you're all concerned about justice, equity, fairness and inclusion. It doesn't matter whether you're right of the centre or left of the centre. But what has happened, this term woke has been purloined, has been captured by really radical. And that's why it's led to the problems on university campuses, and I'm very glad to see that US legislation is starting to turn back. I see during the week 3 deans and professors they said a major world-renowned university have been dismissed because of their widespread anti-Israel, pro-Hamas support. The role of an educational institution is to be like the role of a judge. You keep your personal views to yourself, and you're there to teach, to encourage discussion. So no university should be supporting Hamas. No university should be supporting Israel. That should be left. What the university's job is to do is to bring the Hamas or the Palestinian questions to the fore and to bring the Israeli questions to the fore and say to the student body, you look at these and you will make up your own mind. Now, I'm very glad to see that even in Canberra, they've closed down the Palestinian embassies on the lawn of ANU, Australian National University. I see that 28-year-old Palestinian woman, Fatima Payon or something, I apologise to her if I've not pronounced her name right, she crossed the floor when Labor voted with the coalition against recognising a Palestinian state at the moment. She crossed the floor with the Greens, who had been arguing that must be recognised now. Now, under parliamentary rules, never gets applied, but any member of a party who crosses the floor and votes with an opposition is expelled from the parliament. I've listened to Anthony Albanese making the most lame duck excuses as to why Labor will not enforce any punishment upon this young lady. Now, I agree with that. She's new, she's 28. But I would be bringing her in and saying, you must understand the rules of this institution as well as the rules of the party. And I'd give her a warning and say, please don't do it again. But she could say, yeah, but many people cross the floor and they don't get expelled. And she's right. But there's a party loyalty position. And she just said to the Labor Party, go jump in the lake. Yet she's a Labor senator.
Look, she was voted in by her constituents. She was voted in by a group of people to represent them. So it's not about her personal views. It's about their personal views.
Exactly right.
That's what she's representing. Now, if those personal views command her or direct her to cross the floor because they don't align with the Labor Party, then fine.
Then
cross
do
the
it.
floor.
But you know that probably, and I don't know, and she can correct me if she ever hears about this show, that I doubt that she's gone to the 60-odd thousand New South Welsh people and that have elected her as a senator from New South Wales and said, well, what's your view? The bottom line is that the view of the Australian government and the view of the Australian opposition at the moment is not to recognise a state of Palestine.
Look, most people came here to Australia, no matter what their background, to live a new life, bringing up a family in a wonderful environment.
Yes.
And yes, celebrate your roots, celebrate your culture,
Yes.
celebrate that. But our response should be to what is happening over there, that it is a tragedy at loss of life and what is happening over there. And our thoughts and prayers are with those peoples, and hopefully sanity will prevail. And that's where Australia should stand.
And hopefully Australia's good record since the Second World War and the creation of the State of Israel, good record should be called upon. Look, you've always been a fair country and you punched above your weight. The first president of the General Assembly of the United Nations was Doc Evatt.
Yes.
You have always been respected. But
So-
now look, this is why I've never been a great supporter of multiculturalism, because it brings into our society people of a different cultural background and history, and there's not a lot done to say, we want you to express your culture, but where aspects of your culture are in conflict with us, the host people, it must go. And if you find that you can't do that, we would invite you to leave.
We're happy to drop you off home. As I've
Yeah,
said in the
yes.
past, if I were Prime Minister, I'd have a C-130 at the end
Oh,
of
well, I
Richmond
wouldn't.
Runway, and we'll just drop you home if
No,
you're that keen.
we would do it, I think. I would do it in that you are welcome.
Yeah.
Bring your food, your dance, your music, your history,
Correct.
your literature, and even bring aspects of your culture that are not in complete opposition to ours, because we could learn from it.
Correct.
But our culture, being the host culture, must always predominate, and you might learn from that. But we haven't done that since Malcolm Fraser and since Al Grasby under Whitlam, really. That there was this pie-in-the-sky dream, a bit like fantasy. We'll bring people from all over the world and we'll be a multicoloured one Australia. Well, we are starting to see now in Western countries that have taken the majority of this immigration and refugeeism, we're starting to see the failure of that belief that we'll all just integrate and become French or German or English or American or Australian. And all I say is there needs to be an emphasis on what is England. And
Correct.
don't tell me, look...
It's a definition, isn't it?
Well, what is England? And you'll hear people say, well, it's like you'd hear it in Australia. What is Australia? Well, we don't know. Yes, of course we know. It's justice, equity, fairness and inclusion. It's inviting people to a good country with parliamentary democracy, with no socialism, but with kindness, that introduced one of the best, and it was Labor, one of the best public health systems in the world, and it didn't have to be done through socialism or whatever. But we've either been too scared or we've had people who are too ignorant to be able to look at our society since 1788 and say, I'm going to support that. It's not all evil.
Look, there just always needs to be hard and fast rules, and the issue is that violence will not be tolerated.
Absolutely.
We will celebrate your right to have your view heard.
And look at the nonsense.
Violence will
You've
not
heard
be
me speak on this. I have to bite my tongue when I see Julian Assange stepping off a plane and people welcome him as a hero. He is anything but that. He endangered and has endangered countless lives, and he committed treason. Nothing more, nothing less. And yet you've never heard that word thrown around because, again, progressive media just skirt over that. He's a hero.
So going back to your original discussion, and again, this to me, I always, when we have these lovely little discussions, I boil it down to its simplest principles for me. This is about fairness. This is about equality. This is about understanding. If I had threatened to kill someone in a public place, I expected to be hauled off and taken to task for it.
Well, you would.
And because of whatever, your religion or the colour of your skin, why are you treated differently?
Yes.
So you came here, you are here, we are here. We live by the laws of the land. And there are no excuses for it. And that's what it should be.
Well, this is called One Australia. This is called uniting people, not setting division amongst people. And
we hear these words, inclusionism. We want to be included. We want to be accepted. We want to be a part. But then we see all sorts of different components of that where it's anything but that. And whether that's the immediate media dragging it away, because I often see that
an element of that.
Whenever we hear about Australia Day, it is all about Invasion Day, and it's the media doing it.
Oh, gosh,
I don't often see a tremendous line of people out there going, "Oh, this is terrible." It's usually the media beating it up.
A school in Victoria has changed the words of the national anthem.
Dear, oh dear. How could they do that? It's not the national anthem anymore.
They've just designed it. You see, I've mentioned this a couple of times. For all listeners here over the age of 60, you will have been raised in, you obey the law. If you break the law, then you can expect to be treated accordingly. But the law, remember I use the term time and time again, and it hasn't changed. We live in a society under the rule of law, not the rule of ethnicity, not the rule of multiculturalism, the rule of law. And that law should be applied to everyone. So when you now hear people, and I hear it when I speak, and I ask questions, look, I'm happy to obey the laws that I agree with, but this is a free society, and I'm not going to obey the ones I don't agree with. So I've answered as late as yesterday, well, you can choose not to obey the law. This is a free society, but you must expect and accept the consequences. There'll be those who will say, well, you've exercised the right not to obey the law, but we are empowered and exercise the right to enforce the law.
You live in a community that embraces as those things. The law of the land.
Yes.
And at the end, if you don't want to live in this society, please find somewhere else.
We've had surveys done where, I don't mean to be discourteous, where some Muslim Australians have said, I will obey Allah before I will obey the Australian law.
And this is the battle. You came to Australia for a better life. You came to Australia to earn a living, raise your family in a better environment. That's what you'd hope that was the case to be. So therefore, a condition of entry is, do you know what? You live by our laws.
And the only way these type of difficulties, the spirit whales and courts ordering, again, draconian costs against the innocent party who'd done everything right, the only way this can change is when governments stop acting as favouring certain interest groups. And governments, whether they be the coalition or whether they be Labor, saying our first duty is to all Australians, white, black, yellow, Indian, Chinese, whatever. And our job is to see that it serves everyone, not just one culture or ethnicity.
Look, we're running up against local news, David, so I'll get you to do a quick summary to the end of the program.
I can summarise it by saying we've seen decisions coming out in government and in important matters where fantasy has overruled fact, and we've got to stop it.
Well, thank you very much, David Ashton Lewis.
I was being a bit harsh today. Yeah.
You did bring your soapbox in, didn't you?
I did bring the soapbox in. So I hope I've described what woke is to your friend.
You did. You did it beautifully. Thank you very much for your time again this
Well,
morning.
goodbye Somerset, goodbye Lynn, goodbye all that 10,000, although I understand we have more, and more particularly goodbye Colin. Thank you for your courtesy.
You've been listening to 4CRB's interviews and talkback series. Support local online content and become a financial supporter today at 4CRB.com.